Thank you for joining us here at the ISO 9001 group for our complimentary webinar, What is Environmental, Social, and Governance? I'd like to introduce our speaker today is Oscar Combs. He's a senior consultant here at the ISO 9001 group. Oscar has over 28 years of experience providing consulting, auditing, and training for organizations like AT&T, Hewlett-Packard, Kawasaki, BASF, Halliburton, DHL, and numerous other medium to small size organizations throughout the United States and abroad. Oscar holds an MBA from the University of Houston and is a certified lead auditor and principal management consultant. Without further ado, here is Oscar Combs.
All right. Thank you, Christina. And welcome to the webinar today, compliments of the ISO 9001 group. We like to provide free webinars just to provide further education, to give you an update on the latest and greatest information that may impact your organization, help you improve your operations, help you reduce your risk. Here at the ISO 9001 group, we offer consulting, auditing, and training. We're headquartered here in Houston. We have 5 regional offices throughout the U.S. And our goal is to help your company improve your operations and reduce your risk through your management system. And our consultants have an average of 27 years of experience. Our company is ISO 9001 certified, and we have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. So again, let's kind of get into the webinar topic today. And I do want to encourage you to stay logged in to the end of the webinar. But this webinar is about ESG. This is something that I've been hearing a lot more about here lately. And so I thought it would be prudent to share this with our clients and possibly future clients, because this is something that I can guarantee you that it will touch your company at some point. It's still kind of new, and I've kind of been around and I've seen trends and things be introduced, and companies not really take it so seriously until it really is mandated or it starts to impact them, and then they kind of get in a rush to get it done. But this is one of those things that I truly believe that will stick. I think this is something that is going to make its way into the industry, into various industries, into contracts, government contracts, and if you have contracts with bigger companies, probably make its way into those. So this is something that, although right now you may be like, man, this is not anything that I've really heard a lot about, or maybe you have heard a lot about it, or you may be saying, well, how does this impact my company? Well, today I hope to explain that to you. But I can tell you this is something that has become more prevalent. Many organizations are already doing this. It's making its way down into the supply chain, into the mid-sized, smaller organizations. And so today we're going to talk about what ESG is, and I'm going to give you an overview of it, why it's important, some benefits of it, and how it may impact your organization. Okay, so stay tuned. Stay tuned, logged in into the webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to put those questions into the chat. Christina, she'll be logging those questions and we'll get them all answered at the end of the webinar. All right, so let's talk about what is ESG. All right, the E, of course, stands for environment. The S stands for social, and the G stands for governance. So basically, ESG is a framework, is how you can look at it. All right, it's a framework that you can integrate into your business. And the goal of ESG is really focused on making sure that you are addressing the environmental things of your organization, the social things, and of course, governance. And it's looking at at your interested parties, such as your investors, your customers, your employees, your suppliers, and just the overall community, right? So ESG is a way for your organization to prove that it is sustainable. That's the key in ESG. That S should almost stand for sustainable. But if you think about it, all organizations are not sustainable. And so the goal of ESG is to ensure that we have a framework in place that's considering all of these things that make our organizations sustainable. Currently, what's going on is that many public and private equity firms or investment firms, they require this. Because if you think about an organization that is investing into another organization, or even banks that are loaning funds to an organization, they want to make sure that they are able to get their money plus a return out of that organization. So they have interest in making sure that the organization is sustainable. So many of those type firms are already requiring organizations to implement ESG. But beyond being an investor, the business owner, the mid-sized small business owner, they are the number one investor in their organization currently. And so, of course, they have an interest in their organization being sustainable. Sustainability indicates that your organization has leadership, it has funding, it has operational insight. That's very key, having operational insight, because many organizations are just operating day by day or by the seat of their pants, if you will. And they're not operating based up on insight where they can make adjustments in the event of something, for example, like COVID. You remember when COVID happened in 2019? A lot of organizations were not sustainable. They went bankrupt, or they had to close their doors. They had to lay off a lot of people. The supply chain was drastically interrupted because of all of these types of issues. So that's what ESG is meant to help us address, right? Is it going to be a full solution? No, but it's a framework. Just like any framework, is providing tools and is providing resources to organizations. So again, the main thing that I want you to take away from ESG is that the goal is sustainability. When we look at the definition here, it says the ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time. That's sustainability. Can your organization do what it does over and over again, even in the midst of unexpected events such as COVID? Here I'm going to use this example of COVID because it's so fresh on all of our minds, and everybody in the whole world was impacted by it. But so here are some examples of things that we should think about when it comes to sustainability. COVID, of course, the pandemic, climate change. I don't know about you guys. I am a believer in climate change now. I'm totally convinced. Cybersecurity. There's more and more cyber attacks on companies. So sometimes when companies get hit, they can't recover because they don't have systems and structures in place, or they didn't even anticipate that they would be hacked, if you will, or attacked. Global supply chain issues. We've all witnessed, even especially in the automotive industry, where the chips and many other things that run off of semiconductors just wasn't available. So people couldn't even buy cars, or there's certain material or products that your company probably was trying to purchase and you couldn't. Those lead times got longer and longer, and you could not continue doing what you needed to do, right? The economy. The economy right now is we're having some pretty significant economic issues, major inflation, interest rates are rising. So can your company sustain itself in the midst of all of these economic issues that are going on? What about things like social justice issues? Like you never really think about, man, my company being involved in social justice. Well, guess who works at your company? People. People that would be interested in social justice type issues. And so, all of and your customers, your people in your supply chain. So you're like, well, how does this impact my company? Well, all of these people that I just mentioned, some of them are involved in these social justice issues, which is a big issue for us globally. So ESG is really more than a framework. That's why I want you to encourage you to understand that it's more than a framework. It's more than a buzzword. It's more than the latest buzzword. It's the expectation of your organization realizing that your activities and your operations impact the overall society itself. Like just think about that. Whatever your company is doing, it's not just about revenues. It's not just about expenses. It's not just about profits or equipment. You're actually playing an active role in the world, in society itself. And so these ESG companies are those that are very proactive and have that understanding. All right, so that's what we're talking about is sustainability. Sustainability. Can your company survive when things go bad? Or even when things go good? Like even sometimes when things go good, organizations can't respond to it. They can't meet the demand. So sometimes people think, well, having a lot of business is good. Well, it is good until you can't handle it. You don't have the capacity in your organization to handle it. So that would mean that you're still not sustainable, even in good times, right? So let's talk about the E, environmental. So when it comes to the E, we're talking about things like climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity, waste management, energy management, water management. These are the things that we're talking about when it comes to the environment. All of our organizations impact all of these or some of these, definitely for sure. If you're running machines, if you're running a plant, if you're running a manufacturing facility, if you're transporting goods from point A to B, if you're shipping things through DHL or FedEx, you're having an impact. If you're going back and forth to work, driving, carbon emissions. So these are the things that we have to understand, or your whole fleet, all the vehicles in your organization. So these are the things that we're talking about. And for an organization to be sustainable, you must understand and manage these types of impacts. So let's talk a little bit about greenhouse gases. Some examples include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. So what greenhouse gas does is that it traps heat. It traps heat in the atmosphere. It makes the earth so much hotter. And we all have seen like when things get hot, it's not so good. It's not so good. It causes a lot of severe weather. It causes things to, of course, melt that are not supposed to be melting, or melting at a high rate that's larger than normal, more than normal. So think about this: the gasoline and the diesel that you use in your vehicles, used in planes, used in ships, used to move trains, all the cargo going back and forth. That's what we're talking about. Of course, we're talking about fossil fuels that we use to generate electricity. So all of these are greenhouse gases. So we have to be, as a sustainable organization, and for us to sustain the world, the earth, we have to be mindful of our I would say footprint on the environment. And then things like biodiversity. So biodiversity is the variety of all life on the earth. animals, plants, microorganisms, all the things that we don't think about that sustain our lives on a daily basis. All right. So at a alarming rate, a lot of these things are being killed off due to the environmental impacts that we're having from our day-to-day operations, right? We have pollution, climate change. All these things are impacted by our human activities, individually and also just kind of within our companies. If you think about it, our companies do a lot of these things, and we need to be mindful of that. And so, organizations from the environmental side, we should be working to reduce our energy and our water consumption. And any organization that is just blindly operating and not realizing that they're having an environmental impact, they're really not a sustainable organization. It's not sustainable. And if you think you're sustainable and that you're not having an impact, well, COVID kind of showed us that we can be in our own little bubble, but there could be something that happens, could even be a major storm, for example, that impacts your business, right? So all of these things we don't sometimes think that we're having an impact, but we are having an impact. Let's talk about social things real quick. This is something that is becoming more prevalent. Us organizations really being expected to put people over profits, put living things over profit. It's not just about, oh, let's go make all the money we can. Right? I actually grew up in the oil and gas industry, and I, now I look back on it, yeah, man, we did a lot of environmental damage, that's for sure. But it was just about let's get that all out. Let's meet the demand, let's make that money. But now we look back and we see, man, we had a major impact on the environment, on the earth itself. So sustainable organization must understand the social issues have a tremendous impact on business operations. It has an impact on your profits. It has an impact on people who have made an investment in your organization. Has an impact on your customer. When it comes to social, these are also your customers. Like your customers want to know that your organization cares about more than just profits and revenue, right? So social issues include things like diversity, human rights, consumer protection, animal welfare. We saw a lot of these things come into play with the pandemic. We saw a lot of uprising. We saw a lot of protests. We saw a lot of boycotting. We saw a lot of people destroying property, right? And organizations that are just more socially aware can avoid these types of things. Or shall I say, maybe help avoid. Maybe, we can't avoid it, but we can definitely help reduce the impacts of it, right? When we have these social type issues. Some of the social issues that kind of came out of the pandemic or things like remote working. Like, man, I started back in 1995. If you would have told me that people would be working remotely, I would have probably laughed at you. But that is almost the expectation now, right? If your company wants to be sustainable, you have to make those adjustments with how people are making adjustments, how they're thinking, how they're living. Because I can tell you one thing, with the pandemic, it changed the way a lot of people think, a lot of ways that people work, the work-life balance, like people with losing millions of people are putting, work is not number one priority anymore. So let's just leave it there. So, which is why we've seen like labor. It's hard for companies to even get labor now. It's hard for companies to even get people, qualified people. Just sometimes they just don't want to work right now because we understand, hey, this life thing can be gone, and working like when I grew up, people were working like 60, 70-hour weeks, but I'm glad that people understand like work is it's not all about work. So we have to as an organization make those adjustments so that we can be sustainable. We have to adjust with society, right? So organizations perform best when there is a stable social environment. All right. So we have to understand that, of course, we are all in business to be profitable. That is the only reason to be in business, to be profitable. But we could, of course, we cannot put profit and money over living things. So that's what the S is all about. Governance. Governance. So governance is the G of ESG, and is making a reference to the structures in your organization, the processes in your organization, and the procedures in your organization. Right? So if you think about it, for your organization to be sustainable, it has to have good structures in place, good systems in place, procedures and processes in place. Many of the organizations that failed during COVID didn't have these things in place. They didn't have them. And what COVID did is that it just put a big magnifying glass on every organization that did not have good governance in place. Because I can tell you, within months, companies were folding. They were closing doors. They were laying off thousands of employees because they didn't have things in place to sustain. And those same companies lost money for the owners, the investors, the bank loans, the banks that loaned them money for capital and for equipment. All that was lost. And so that is why ESG is so important, because organizations without these things are just not sustainable. And in many cases, they're just kind of going day by day and kind of flying by the seat of their pants, right? And that's what we do here all day, every day. We help organizations in these areas, especially in all three of these areas. But I was definitely on the E side and heavy on the G side. That is what we do all day, every day with our management systems. So now we understand what ESG is all about. Let's talk about why it's important, right? We talked about this first point already. Like I said, if you leave with nothing else today, I want you to know that ESG, if somebody asks you, man, you heard about this ESG stuff, what is that all about? Is that just another buzzword? No, it's about sustaining our company. That's what it's about. It's about sustainable operations. It allows your organization to adapt to ever-changing environments. Man, when I tell you now, this business environment is ever changing. Like, it's always been changing, but the change is so rapid now. Next month, if there's going to be could be something else. Like, if it's not the cybersecurity, it's the economy. If it's not that, it's social issues. If it's not that, it's supply chain issues. If it's not that, it's a new regulation. Like, there's a lot of changes going on. It's technology going on, right? Different ways people are wanting to pay money, Bitcoins, and I mean, it's all over the place, guys. It's ever changing, and if your company cannot keep up with that change, I mean, you're going to go out of business. You won't be sustainable. It offers a competitive advantage for those who are looking into ESG. So 64% of Americans are willing to spend extra money to buy sustainable products, right? So we all have seen the switch into these electronic vehicles, the semiconductors, the solar energy. See, most people, not all people, and everybody, of course, is not going to be on board with ESG, and that's okay. But those people always come on the very back end. We call them laggards. They come in at the very end when they're forced to come in. This webinar is for people who are interested in kind of like being on the front end of all of that, not having to wait to the very end, right? Because most people, they want to do business with companies that are interested in sustainability. They have sustainable products. That's why you see like Tesla and other electronic vehicles are becoming more popular because, yeah, overall, I would say the majority, over 50% of people, as I just mentioned, 64% of people are interested in the sustainment of our environment and working with companies that share that interest. When it comes to a competitive advantage, another one is improved labor conditions. We talked about in the S of ESG that it was more about the people, and so the employees are of course companies are being a lot more flexible when it comes to working with their employees and the labor force. More diversity in the workforce, right? I mean, so that is a requirement now. That is something that's expected in an organization, that there's diversity. And then also reliable supply chains. A lot the companies that survived, let's say during COVID, they had reliable supply chains, right? They were able to establish lead times and have enough inventory to hold them over until those lead times to kind of accommodate those long lead times, right? Companies that didn't have those good supply chains in place, those good relationships, they were not able to order things that they needed. What about this third point? Improves financial performance. So how does ESG improve financial performance? Well, for one, it makes your organization more marketable. As I just mentioned, 64% of Americans are willing to spend more money with companies that are sustainable or that provide sustainable products. Like I just mentioned, Tesla as one good example, right? People are willing to spend more money on a Tesla because they find it to be sustainable and they're able to reduce expenses. So no different than your company. Your company would be able to operate more efficiently when you are reducing your energy consumption, when you are being more mindful of your environmental impacts, when you are not having so much turnover in your organization because employees are more satisfied working there, or your company is being more accommodating to their needs. And just overall, your company will be operating more efficiently because you have structures in place, you have processes in place, you have procedures in place, you have a sound supply chain in place. All of that stuff leads to increased profitability for the company, right? And then lastly, of course, it builds customer loyalty. As I mentioned, and I'll repeat again, that people want to do business with companies that seem to have an interest in the world or reducing their impact on the environment, that's more socially responsible, that has good governance, because they know that, okay, these companies, they're not going to just go away, so I can be loyal to them, because when something happens, good, bad, or you know something unforeseen, I can depend on this company to still be there. I didn't, during COVID, none of my Amazon packages, they didn't get delayed. They didn't stop shipping. They didn't stop working. They didn't close their doors. Um, Amazon is one of the companies that's really big on a lot of these ESG items as well. So that's the importance. So people say, okay, are there any standards when it comes to ESG? No, not really. There are no standards, but we know that there's ISO standards, or maybe you don't know, but I want to let you know that you can utilize ISO standards to meet these principles of ESG, because what I like about ISO is that it gives us some good international guidelines. So ISO 14001, of course, is an environmental standard. So it's going to help you assess your environmental impacts and risk and help you reduce those. ISO 50001. 50001 is an energy management system. So what ISO 50001 does is that it gives you guidelines on identifying what it calls your significant energy sources or uses, right? So all of the different equipment that you may have in your organization that is consuming significant energy, it gives you guidelines on how to reduce that. And so, of course, if you're reducing that, you're reducing expenses as well. You're being more efficient. When it comes to the S, ISO 26000 provides guidelines when it comes to social responsibility. So you can look into that standard, and all of these standards. It doesn't matter the size of your company. They're all meant for all sizes, all industries, product and or service. And then when it comes to G, the governance, there's ISO 37000. So ISO 37000 is focused on giving guidelines on the ethos of your organization, the culture, the norms and practices and behaviors of your organization, and putting those structures and processes in place. Right? So you don't have to just kind of guess about, oh man, what does the E mean? How can I meet that? Or what does the S mean? Like I'm trying to give you some concrete standards that you can use to help you meet ESG or help you um, determine if ESG is the direction your company wants to go. All right. So let's talk about how ESG could possibly impact your company very soon or in the future. Okay. So ESG in principle is something that could definitely, I can see becoming a requirement. And you guys know how that works when, first things start kind of rolling in as, oh, this is a nice little buzzword. And a couple years later, it starts making its way into your customers saying, hey, have you guys ever thought about ESG? And then before you know it, you get visitors from your customer. Hey, what do you guys do in regards to social things? And like, what do social things have to do with manufacturing? Or what are you guys doing in the area of greenhouse gases to control that? So they start asking you those types of questions, or you get that big government contract that you're interested in bidding on, and you start saying things that kind of sound ESG-ish, right? You don't know it. Is that ESG? They're talking about greenhouse gases and social governance, and what is this, right? So you're gonna start seeing these things. It may not come out and say ESG, but you may start seeing, you may even see it from these ISO standards that I mentioned, where they'll say, hey, you need to start looking at ISO 50001, or you may need to start looking at ISO 26000 or 37000. But what they're after is really trying to encouraging your company to become more sustainable. See, because your company is part of their supply chain, and they want a sustainable supply chain so that they can be sustainable. The same reason why you should be looking into your supply chain, making sure that your supply chain is sustainable so that your supply chain is not causing your company business disruptions, right? So organizations that are on the front end of this. Now, again, I'm not talking to people who don't believe in ESG or think that this is just a latest buzzword. Those people, as I said, they always come screaming and hollering later. I'm talking about those who understand these principles and understand that our business operations are part of the bigger society. So these organizations, they will experience increased marketability because I mentioned people want to do business with sustainable companies. You can expect more profitability, lower energy consumption, improved employee satisfaction, reliable supply chain, reducing your own operational risk, and of course, customer satisfaction. Guys, this ESG is very important in my opinion. As I mentioned, I've seen a lot of these trends come, and I've seen some go. I've seen trends become popular and then they disappear. I wouldn't be talking to you about this one if I thought it was one of those that would is coming and disappearing. This one, I feel it's going to stick around because it has good merit. All right, so that is all we have today in the webinar. Let's see if we have any questions. Christina, we have any questions from anyone?
Looks like we do have a few questions here. Our first question is ESG just for large corporations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what I see right now is that primarily, everything always starts with large corporations. Let's just start there. It's always the large corporations because they are the first case studies, if you will, right? They have the resources, they have the money, they have the equipment, they have the people, they have the structure because they're sustainable, right? So they have these things in place. And so they're able to kind of be the first adapters to many of these type things. But ESG has nothing to do with the size of your organization, right? So if your organization is a big company, mid-sized company, small company, I think all companies are important. So I don't really buy into big, medium, small type descriptors. But this is something that your company, regardless of its size, should really investigate. I would say you kind of just want to investigate it at this point to see if it's something that is right for you is it a good match for your culture. All right, Christina, anything else?
Next question is there a standard for just ESG?
No standard in place that I'm aware of, at least. I would just encourage you to follow those standards that we have. So if some of you are already, some people on here today may be already subscribing to 14,001 because that's a very popular standard, right? So you're part of that E already. Now the other part of the E is the energy, right? And as I mentioned, that was 50,001. So that's still a little new. A lot of people are not really have really dove into 50,001, but I would encourage you to look at that. So that's going to help on the energy management. And then ISO 26,000 is more for social governance. And then ISO 37,000 is for governance of your organization. So no specific ESG, but combined ISO 14,000, 50,001, 26,000, and 37,000 would kind of give you an ESG standard to follow. Okay.
Great. Looks like the next question is Is there a certification for ESG?
Again, yeah, no certification yet. It's not a requirement even yet, unless it's required by your customer. It is required by some people, some organizations, by their investors, their maybe their customers. As I mentioned, I feel like this will probably make its way into government contracts. We see how all of the government regulations are aligned with ESG principles, with the energy reduction, for example, electronic vehicles, solar energy. So you can kind of see all of these things coming together. So if your company has government contracts, at some point I can see some of this making its way into that, but no certification at this time that I'm aware of.
Looks like our final question is, can can your company assess if we're ESG compliant?
And I'm assuming company meaning the ISO 9001 group. Can we assess? Yes, we can assess your ESG capabilities by kind of doing what we call an assessment, and it would be based around those standards that I just mentioned, right? So we could come in and kind of do sometimes people call it a gap analysis or a gap assessment to those ISO standards that I mentioned, and then we could kind of give you a report and say, okay, yeah, your company is strong on the E side. On the S side, maybe there's a little work needs to be done. On the governance side, pretty good. You may want to shore these things up. So yeah, there's some things that we can do to help your organization if you're interested in considering or learning more about ESG. Maybe we could even do some overview training to your management team or others that just, you know what, this ESG may impact us. Maybe something that we want to introduce to our management. So yeah, I would say that's how we could possibly help. All right. Any other questions, Christina?
No, that's all the questions we have for today.
All right. Well, hey guys. Well, again, thank you for tuning into our webinar. Just hold on. Christina has a few comments to say after this, but we really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we look forward to bringing you further webinars as well. All right, Christina, we'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Oscar. Again, we just wanted to thank you for attending the ISO 9001 Group's webinar today. Stay tuned for future webinars like these to come. This webinar will be available on YouTube, where we encourage you to follow us for more webinars. We invite you to visit our website at the ISO 9001group.com. Thanks so much and have a blessed day.